Ambassador Kim Miho straightened his black diplomatic uniform as the massive doors of the Galactic Confederation chamber slid open with a soft hiss. The room beyond was enormous, its crystal walls stretching up into darkness while strange lights danced across the surface like trapped lightning. The air smelled of ozone and something metallic that made his nose twitch. 12 different alien species sat in a perfect semicircle, their seats raised high above the floor where humans were meant to stand. Miho had seen this setup many times before in his career, but today felt different. Today felt final. His aide Park Jiwon walked beside him, her footsteps silent on the polished floor. She carried a small data pad and kept her face completely neutral, though Miho could sense her tension. Behind them, Lee Haeyoung moved with the quiet confidence of a soldier who had seen too many battles. As the military attaché, Haeyoung rarely spoke during these meetings, but her presence always reminded everyone that humanity was not defenseless. The center seat belonged to Chancellor Vextar of the Zephyrian Empire. His species looked like tall, thin birds covered in blue-green feathers that shifted color with their emotions. 4 large black eyes studied the humans with what Miho had learned to recognize as barely hidden contempt. When Vextar spoke, his words came out as clicks and whistles that the universal translator turned into cold, mechanical sentences. Ambassador Kim, Vextar said, leaning forward in his chair, "We have been very patient with your species and its rapid expansion across our galaxy." To his left sat the Altarian representative, whose body seemed to be made of liquid metal that constantly shifted and flowed. Sometimes it looked human-shaped, sometimes like abstract art. The being's voice sounded like wind chimes when it spoke. "Your people have been in space for barely 200 years, the Altarian said with obvious disgust. "Some of us have maintained these territories for over 10,000 years. A holographic display flickered to life in the center of the room, showing a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. Hundreds of small blue dots marked human colonies scattered across the outer edges of known space. Red lines now surrounded many of these dots, marking them as disputed territory. Miho studied the display carefully. These were worlds his people had found empty and lifeless, then spent decades terraforming into gardens. These were colonies where human children had been born under alien stars, where families had built homes and communities from nothing but hope and hard work. "The terms are very simple," Vextar continued, his feathers shifting to a darker shade of blue. "Humanity will give up 40% of your colonies to Confederation oversight. In return, we will allow you to continue as members of galactic society." The word, allow, hung in the air like a threat. Miho felt Jiwon's slight intake of breath beside him, though her expression never changed. Haeyoung remained perfectly still, but Miho knew she was calculating distances and escape routes out of pure habit. A creature that looked like a walking tree covered in silver bark spoke next. Its voice sounded like rustling leaves. "Your species expanded too quickly. You did not ask permission. You did not follow proper protocols. We found empty worlds," Miho said quietly. "We harmed no one." Vextar's laugh sounded like breaking glass when filtered through the translator. "Empty? Those worlds belong to the Confederation by right of ancient claim. Your ignorance of our laws does not excuse your crimes." Several other aliens made sounds that the translator interpreted as agreement. A being made of what looked like living crystal chimed in with a sound like bells. "Young species must learn their place. You cannot simply take whatever you want." Miho looked around the semicircle at these beings who called themselves the rulers of the galaxy. He thought about the human colonies they wanted to claim. Worlds like New Sol, where his own sister had built a medical center that treated patients from 6 different species. Worlds like Terra Nova, where human engineers had created atmospheric processors that other species now copied. Worlds like Haven, where human diplomats had negotiated the first peace treaty between 2 warring alien races in over a century. "I need to be very clear about something," Miho said, his voice calm and steady. "This demand for 40% of our colonies. This is not negotiable?" Vextar's 4 eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "It is not a demand, Ambassador. It is an ultimatum. Accept our generous terms or face complete isolation from galactic society. No trade. No communication. No protection." The Altarian's metallic form shifted into a more aggressive shape. "Your species will not survive alone. You need us more than we need you." Miho exchanged a quick glance with Haeyoung. The military attaché's face showed nothing, but she gave the tiniest nod. They had discussed this possibility many times during their journey here. Earth's government had given Miho clear instructions about what to do if negotiations failed. "I see," Miho said, beginning to gather the papers from the table in front of him. "Then I suppose we have nothing more to discuss." Jaiwan immediately began packing her data pad and documents. Haeyoung stepped closer to both of them, her hand resting casually near the emergency beacon on her belt. The aliens looked confused. This was not how these meetings usually went. Younger species were supposed to argue, to beg, to offer compromises. They were not supposed to simply pack up and leave. Ambassador, Vexter said, his feathers now bright red with anger, I think you misunderstand the situation. This is not a negotiation. This is us telling you what will happen. Miho sealed his briefcase with a soft click. No, Chancellor, I understand perfectly. You have made your position very clear. He looked directly at Vextar with steady eyes. Let me make ours equally clear. Humanity formally withdraws from all diplomatic relations with the Galactic Confederation, effective immediately. The chamber erupted in shocked sounds from 12 different species. The tree-like being's leaves rustled violently. The crystal entity chimed like broken bells. The Altarian's form collapsed into an angry puddle before reshaping itself. You cannot do this. Vextar screeched, rising from his chair. You need us. Your species will die alone in the dark. Miho, Jaiwan, and Haeyoung walked calmly toward the chamber doors. Their footsteps echoed in the sudden silence as the alien delegates realized what was happening. You will be back within one cycle. Vextar called after them. You will come crawling back, begging for our mercy. At the threshold of the chamber, Miho paused without turning around. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly to every corner of the room. No, Chancellor. We will not. The doors closed behind them with a final, soft hiss. The message arrived at exactly midnight, Earth Standard Time, on every human communication device across the galaxy. 3 simple words that would change everything: Operation Silent Dawn. Choi Dian read the message twice before setting down her coffee cup on Zentari Prime. Around her, the human embassy hummed with its usual morning activity. Diplomats prepared for meetings, cultural exchange students practiced their water-breathing techniques for interaction with the aquatic Zentari, and researchers compiled data from joint scientific projects that had lasted for decades. Pack everything, Dian announced to her staff. We leave in 72 hours. Nam Sujin looked up from her desk where she had been translating poetry between human and Zentari languages. She was young, barely 30, and had spent her entire adult life learning to communicate with beings who lived underwater and spoke in musical tones that sounded like whale songs. Leave? Sujin asked, her voice confused. But we have the cultural festival next week. The Zentari children have been practicing human songs for months. Dian began pulling encrypted data cores from the embassy's central computer system. Each core contained centuries of careful diplomatic work, scientific breakthroughs, and cultural exchanges that had built trust between humans and aliens. Orders from Earth. All human personnel return home immediately. Are we really doing this? Sujin whispered, watching Dian seal the data cores in special containers that would automatically destroy their contents if tampered with. The Confederation made their choice, Dian replied, her voice steady despite the sadness in her eyes. Now we make ours. 3 star systems away, Yang Minsu stood in the control room of mining station Omega-7, watching massive extraction machines tear rare metals from the core of an asteroid. The Corvin overseers, tall beings covered in rock-like skin, had worked with humans for over 50 years to supply materials that kept half the galaxy's technology functioning. Shutdown sequence initiated, Minsu announced, his fingers dancing over the control panel. One by one the massive machines went silent. The asteroid, which had been steadily shrinking for decades, would now remain untouched. The lead Corvin, whose name translated roughly to Stone Who Sees Deep, approached with heavy, confused steps. His species communicated through vibrations in the ground, and the translation device on his chest turned his words into mechanical speech. But quota seasons approach, Stone Who Sees Deep rumbled. The Altarian fleet needs hull materials. The Zephyrian colonies require reactor cores. Production cannot stop now. Minsu gathered his personal belongings into a small bag. These are no longer our concerns, he said simply, walking toward the shuttle that would take him away from this place forever. The effects spread faster than anyone expected, like ripples in a pond after a stone is thrown. On the research vessel New Horizon, floating in the space between 3 different solar systems, Beck Salmon received the recall message while running the most important experiment of her career. Around her, scientists from 6 different species worked together on a project that could revolutionize how the entire galaxy communicated. They were so close to success that Salmon could practically taste it. The breakthrough they sought would allow instant communication across unlimited distances, connecting every world in the galaxy as if they were neighbors. Delete everything, Saman whispered to herself, then began typing the commands that would erase years of work. Dr. Kellogg's, the Altarian physicist whose liquid metal body had been her research partner for 5 years, noticed what she was doing. His form, usually fluid and graceful, froze into rigid metal lines. "Saman, what are you doing?" Kellogg's asked, his voice sounding like broken wind chimes. "Surely this is temporary madness? We are so close to changing everything." Saman's fingers hesitated over the final delete command. This research represented the best years of her life, the culmination of everything she had worked for. But Earth's orders were clear. "I am sorry, my friend," she said, pressing the final key. The Confederation made their choice. The computer screens went dark as decades of research disappeared forever. Across the galaxy, Kim Wonho sat in the navigation center of the Transgalactic Shipping Consortium, studying the holographic maps that showed every major trade route between the stars. As chief navigator, he knew these paths better than anyone alive. He knew which routes were safe, which had hidden dangers, and which shortcuts could save months of travel time. With careful precision, he began uploading new navigation warnings to the galactic database. Routes that had been safe for decades were suddenly marked as dangerous. Paths that saved time and fuel were now listed as containing unstable gravity fields and radiation storms. None of it was true, but by the time other species figured that out, shipping costs would have tripled and supply chains across the galaxy would be in chaos. On the agricultural world of Narration, Co Jiho watched local administrators struggle with the hydroponic systems that had fed 3 billion people for the past century. The systems were incredibly complex, requiring precise mixtures of nutrients, exact temperature controls, and timing that had to be perfect down to the minute. "Why are the plants dying?" demanded the head administrator, an insect-like being whose wings buzzed with frustration. "Your machines are broken. Your people have sabotaged them." Jiho zipped up his travel bag and smiled sadly. The truth was simpler and more devastating than sabotage. The systems worked perfectly, but only humans understood how to maintain them, how to adjust them when seasons changed, how to recognize the subtle signs that indicated problems before they became disasters. "No sabotage was necessary," Jiho said, walking toward the transport that would take him home. "We simply took our knowledge with us." Within 30 days, the galaxy began to understand what it had lost. Human knowledge, human innovation, and human cooperation had been woven into the fabric of galactic civilization so thoroughly that removing it caused everything to begin unraveling. The Confederation had demanded submission from humanity. Instead, they received silence. And in that silence, they would learn the true cost of their arrogance. The humans were going home, taking their gifts with them. The galaxy would have to learn to survive without the species they had tried to control. Chancellor Vextar had not slept properly in weeks. His blue-green feathers, once bright and perfectly groomed, now looked dull and ragged. Dark circles surrounded his 4 black eyes as he stood before the emergency council session, looking out at representatives from what remained of the Galactic Confederation. The great chamber that had once buzzed with confident chatter now felt heavy with fear and confusion. Empty seats marked where 3 species had already withdrawn from the Confederation, choosing to face an uncertain future alone rather than sink with the failing alliance. Technical coordinator Zilnara approached the speaking platform, her crystalline body flickering with pale, stressed light. Under normal circumstances, her species glowed with steady, beautiful colors that shifted like aurora. Now she looked like a dying star. "The situation continues to worsen," Zilnara reported, her voice creating musical chimes that the translators turned into flat, mechanical words. 17 major space stations have suffered critical system failures this cycle. We estimate complete infrastructure collapse within 6 months if current trends continue. A murmur of fear rippled through the assembled delegates. Governor Mordex of Castellan raised one of his 6 arms to speak. His insect-like species had always been proud of their technological abilities, but now his wings buzzed with nervous energy. "My world's defense systems are failing," Mordex announced, his mandibles clicking with anxiety. "The humans installed our planetary shields 50 years ago. Without their maintenance protocols, we are defenseless. 2 cycles, maybe 3 before complete failure." Similar reports came from across the galaxy. On industrial worlds, factories stood silent because no one understood the human-designed automation systems. On agricultural planets, crops withered because alien farmers could not operate the complex growing systems that humans had built. But the most dangerous problem was communication itself. Chief linguist Vectoran of the Altarian Collective had made a terrifying discovery in the central translation networks that allowed different species to understand each other. The universal translator relies entirely on human linguistic algorithms, Vectoran reported, his metallic form shifting nervously between different shapes. These systems are degrading without human oversight. Translation errors are becoming more frequent and more severe. The first major diplomatic crisis happened 3 days later. Ambassador Peltera of the Zentari delegation had been meeting with Corvin mining representatives to discuss peaceful trade agreements. The Zentari, who lived underwater and communicated through musical sounds, had offered to share their advanced water purification technology in exchange for rare metals. But the failing translation system turned the Zentari's words from, "We propose peaceful trade of our water technology for your metals," into, "We demand you surrender your territories or face our superior weapons." The Corvin delegation, a species that had fought wars for thousands of years over territorial disputes, immediately declared the meeting an act of war. Within hours, Corvin battle fleets were moving towards Zentari space, and the aquatic species was mobilizing their defensive forces in confusion and fear. It took 3 days of frantic communication through backup systems to prevent an actual war, but the damage was done. Trust between species began to collapse as fast as their technology. Then came the asteroid. Deep Space Monitor Kelnox was working the night shift at Observation Station Delta 9 when his sensors detected something that made his blood freeze. A massive chunk of rock and ice, 30 kilometers across and moving at incredible speed, was heading straight for Nexus Prime, one of the most populated worlds in Zephyrian space. Emergency transmission to all stations. Kelnox broadcast immediately. Category 5 extinction threat detected. Asteroid RG7739 on collision course with Nexus Prime. Impact in 8 standard days. The response was immediate panic. Nexus Prime housed 15 million Zephyrians in floating cities that hung in the planet's thick atmosphere. But as emergency coordinators tried to calculate evacuation routes, they discovered a horrifying problem. The early warning system that had protected the galaxy from asteroid impacts for over a century was operated by humans. The complex network of observation stations, predictive computers, and tracking algorithms that could precisely calculate where space rocks would hit had gone silent when humans withdrew from galactic civilization. Emergency Coordinator Halvex worked frantically with what remained of Confederation technology, but their calculations were crude and unreliable. The asteroid might hit the northern continent or the southern ocean, or even miss the planet entirely. The margin of error was so large that evacuation became a deadly gamble. Do we evacuate the northern cities and risk abandoning the south if we are wrong? Halvex asked his team. Or do we spread our rescue ships across the entire planet and risk saving no one? Evacuation ships launched in all directions, their crews guessing where safety might be found. Millions of Zephyrians fled their homes without knowing if they were flying toward salvation or destruction. On the 7th day, when panic had reached its peak and evacuation fleets were scattered randomly across the solar system, something unexpected happened. A burst transmission from human space reached Confederation receivers. The message contained precise trajectory calculations, exact impact coordinates, and optimal evacuation routes. In the few hours remaining, rescue fleets were able to redirect to safety zones and save 12 million lives. But 3 million Zephyrians died when the asteroid struck the northern continent exactly where the human calculations said it would hit. Chancellor Vextar stood in the ruins of New Telone City, looking at the massive crater where a thriving metropolis had existed just days before. The air was thick with dust and smoke, and the cries of survivors echoed across the devastation. "They saved who they could," whispered his aide looking at the human transmission data. "Even after we cast them out, they tried to help." Vextar's 4 eyes filled with tears as he finally understood the magnitude of their mistake. Humans had not been junior partners seeking acceptance in galactic civilization. They had been its invisible foundation, holding everything together with their knowledge, their innovation, and their quiet competence. The galaxy was falling apart without them, and there might be no way to put it back together. The Great Council chamber that had once been a symbol of galactic unity now felt like a cage full of angry, frightened animals. Chancellor Vextar's voice cracked as he screamed at Admiral Kexvar, his blue-green feathers standing on end like an angry bird. "Your incompetence cost us Nexus Prime." Vextar roared, his 4 eyes blazing with fury. 3 million of my people are dead because your fleet could not protect them." Admiral Kexvar's metallic form shifted through angry red colors as he rose from his seat. The Altarian's body, usually smooth and flowing like liquid mercury, now looked jagged and sharp with rage. My incompetence? Kexvar's voice rang like struck metal. Your arrogance drove away the only species that could have prevented this disaster. You demanded they surrender their colonies, and now we all pay the price. From the special pool designed for aquatic species, Counselor Telara of the Zentari Collective raised her graceful form above the water. Her blue-silver skin gleamed wet in the chamber's lights, and her large, dark eyes held deep sadness. Several of our member worlds are already trying to make secret deals with human space, she said, her musical voice translated into mechanical words. They offer individual trade agreements, technology sharing, anything to restore what we have lost. Vextar's head snapped toward her like a striking snake. Treason, he declared, his voice echoing through the chamber. The Confederation speaks with one voice. We do not negotiate separately. But Ambassador Wolnex of the Corvin Mining Guild shook his massive, rock-covered head. His species looked like walking mountains, and when he spoke, his voice rumbled like distant thunder. The Confederation's voice led us into this catastrophe, Wolnex said, his words heavy with despair. My people are starving. Our agricultural worlds depend on human technology that has fed us for 2 centuries. Without their knowledge, crops fail and billions go hungry. Reports kept coming in from across the galaxy, each one worse than the last. Captain Yextol of the Border Patrol delivered news that made everyone in the chamber go quiet with shock. 3 Confederation worlds have tried to break through human space boundaries on their own, Yextol reported, his insect-like form trembling. They sent diplomatic ships with offers of surrender and tribute. The human defensive systems disabled all the ships without firing a single weapon. They used some kind of electromagnetic pulse that overloaded our power systems completely. How many ships lost? Asked Admiral Kexvar, though his metallic form was already turning pale silver with dread. None lost, sir, Yextol replied. But all crews reported the same thing. The human defenses knew exactly where they were going to be before they got there. Our ships were disabled the moment they crossed the border, then gently pushed back into Confederation space. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The humans were not just hiding behind their borders. They were demonstrating technological superiority that made Confederation military power look like children playing with toys. It was then that Fleet Admiral Morgex requested permission to speak. His species looked like tall, gray-skinned humanoids with large black eyes, and his military record was legendary. He had never lost a battle in 40 years of service. The time for talk has ended, Morgex declared, standing at attention. I request authorization to restore order through military action. 800 ships from 5 different species stand ready to remind humanity of their place in the galaxy. Vextar looked around the chamber at the desperate faces of his fellow leaders. Everything was falling apart. Their technology failed daily, their people starved, and their civilization crumbled. Military action seemed like the only option left. Authorization granted, Vextar said grimly. Bring them back. 3 days later, Admiral Morgex led the largest military fleet in Confederation history toward human space. 800 warships representing the combined might of 5 different species moved in perfect formation through the darkness between stars. Morgex had fought in dozens of battles and conquered rebellious worlds across the galaxy. He had seen every type of defensive system, every military strategy, every trick that inferior species used when faced with superior force. Humans, he was certain, would surrender the moment they saw his overwhelming fleet. Attention human vessels, Morgex broadcast as his fleet reached the human border. You will stand down immediately and prepare for Confederation oversight. Your isolation ends today. The response came quickly, but not from any human diplomat or military officer. Instead, an artificial intelligence spoke in perfect galactic standard, its voice calm and emotionless. Admiral Morgex of the Confederation Fleet, you are entering sovereign human space. You have 60 seconds to alter course before defensive protocols automatically engage. Morgex laughed, the sound echoing through his command bridge. His crew joined in, confident in their overwhelming numerical advantage. 60 seconds? Morgex said, still chuckling. We represent the combined fleets of 5 species. We have 800 warships. What can you possibly do to stop us? The laughter died in his throat as his sensors began detecting energy signatures unlike anything in Confederation databases. The space around his fleet suddenly filled with objects that had not been there moments before. Platforms, weapons, defensive systems that seemed to materialize out of nothing. Admiral, his tactical officer whispered, his voice filled with terror. These energy readings, they are beyond our understanding. Whatever the humans have built, it makes our technology look primitive. Morgex stared at his displays as the humans demonstrated just how much they had been holding back during 2 centuries of peaceful coexistence. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity had never needed Confederation protection. They had been protecting everyone else from what they were truly capable of. Chancellor Vextar sat alone in his office, staring out at the dying lights of the Confederation capital. 2 years had passed since Ambassador Kim Miho walked out of the council chambers, and the galaxy had changed beyond recognition. The once proud spires of the capital city now stood dark and crumbling, their power systems failing one by one. His reflection in the window showed a broken leader. His blue-green feathers, once bright and magnificent, had turned gray and brittle. His 4 eyes were dim with exhaustion, surrounded by dark circles that spoke of countless sleepless nights. The weight of his decisions had aged him decades in just 2 years. The reports on his desk told the same story of collapse from across the galaxy. 8 member species had formally withdrawn from the Confederation, choosing to face an uncertain future alone rather than sink with the failing alliance. Those who remained were barely surviving. On Corvanis, the great mining operations that had supplied materials to build starships and space stations had ground to a halt. Without human expertise, the complex extraction systems had broken down, leaving billions of tons of valuable resources trapped in asteroids and deep planetary mines. Agricultural worlds that had fed the galaxy for centuries now struggled to feed their own populations. The sophisticated growing systems that humans had designed could not be operated by other species. Crops withered in fields that had once been the garden worlds of galactic civilization. The most heartbreaking reports came from medical facilities across the galaxy. Human medical knowledge had advanced treatment for dozens of alien diseases, but without human doctors and researchers, old plagues were returning. On 3 different worlds, diseases that had been eliminated for generations were killing thousands. Chief Communications Officer Nael Vera knocked softly on the office door before entering. Her crystalline form, once bright with healthy bioluminescence, now flickered weakly like a dying candle. She carried a data pad containing the final casualty reports from Admiral Morgex's disastrous attempt to force humanity back into the Confederation. Chancellor, Nael Vera said quietly, the galaxy-wide broadcast network is prepared. What remains of it anyway? Vextar nodded slowly. The great communication network that had connected every world in the galaxy was failing. Human-designed relay stations were shutting down without maintenance, leaving entire star systems isolated from the rest of civilization. Very well, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The transmission that followed would be remembered as the moment the Galactic Confederation officially admitted defeat. Vextar's image appeared on screens across the galaxy, reaching every inhabited world through the few remaining functional relay stations. To the human governments and peoples of known space, Vextar began, his voice cracking with emotion. I, Chancellor Vextar, speaking for what remains of the Galactic Confederation, formally request the resumption of diplomatic relations. He paused, struggling to continue. The words he was about to speak went against everything he had believed about Confederation superiority and the natural order of galactic civilization. We acknowledge our grave errors in judgment, he continued. We offer complete territorial autonomy to all human colonies, full trade partnerships on terms of your choosing, and... His voice broke completely, unconditional surrender of all previously claimed human territories. The admission hung in the air like a death sentence for everything the Confederation had represented. Vextar was not just asking for help, he was begging for it. The response took 3 days to arrive, and it did not come from Ambassador Kim Miho or any other diplomat. Instead, it came from Fleet Admiral Park Sung-yoon of the Human Defense Command, broadcast on all frequencies from somewhere deep in human space. Chancellor Vextar and members of the former Galactic Confederation, Admiral Park's voice was calm and professional, but carried an undertone of cold finality. 2 years ago, your alliance demanded that humanity surrender 40% of our territories for the privilege of your continued tolerance. Vextar listened with growing despair as the Admiral continued. Today you offer us everything we already possess and beg us to save you from the consequences of your own arrogance. The Confederation had its opportunity for partnership. You chose dominance over cooperation, threats over negotiation, submission over equality. The words hit like physical blows. Every accusation was true and Vextar knew it. Humanity offered you our knowledge, our innovation, and our friendship, Admiral Park continued. You demanded submission instead. You wanted subjects, not partners. You sought to control us rather than work with us. Deep space sensors across what remained of Confederation territory detected something that made the final defeat complete. Massive human colony ships were moving toward distant galaxies, carrying technologies that made faster-than-light travel look primitive. Humanity was not just rejecting the Confederation, they were leaving the galaxy entirely. "We have discovered that the universe is vast and full of possibilities," Admiral Park's message concluded. "Our colonies prosper, our research advances, and our people build new homes among distant stars. We are establishing settlements in the Andromeda system, where we will create a civilization based on mutual respect rather than enforced hierarchy." The final words echoed across every remaining communication system in the galaxy. The Galactic Confederation made its choice when it demanded our surrender. We have made ours by choosing to leave you behind. Farewell. As human communication arrays went permanently silent, Vextar realized the full scope of their failure. They had not been negotiating with a junior species seeking acceptance. They had been in the presence of the future itself, and they had chosen to reject it. Now that future was moving to distant galaxies, leaving the Confederation to collapse in darkness while humanity built something new among alien stars. The galaxy would remember this lesson long after both civilizations had evolved beyond recognition. But humanity would not be there to see it. They had found better worlds to call home.